Hello, good evening, and welcome to the third in the series of the RoR Winter Webinars, designed to help riders such as yourselves get the very best out of your former racehorses. Over the course of this winter, RoR is staging 4 enlightening sessions with advice from experts, 1 a month, concluding next month in February. Registration is free and open to anyone with an interest in retraining former racehorses or considering rehoming one, and we've got plenty of advice and feedback along the way. Tonight's session is following on from December's webinar, looking at jumping this time, so progressing to jumping through pole work, and follows on, as I say, from last month's early stages of retraining webinar, where the focus was very much on the flat. Don't forget, you can check out the first 2 webinars. We also had one that started back in November, which covered all things physio, dental, and really getting started. And you can watch all of these webinars. They'll be available on the RoR YouTube channel. Before we go any further, we must say a very special thank you to the Levy Board, who have helped to fund and put on these webinars this winter. We're very grateful to them, as we are indeed grateful to you for joining us tonight. My name is Mark Hayward. I'll be presenting the webinar, and I'm really thrilled to say that I'm joined by three very esteemed panelists, the first of which, backed by popular demand, it's Yogi Breisner. Yogi is one of the best known coaches and instructors in equestrian sport. As a rider, he was a member of the Swedish eventing team from 1976 to 1987, winning European team gold in 1983 and competing at the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics. He finished in the top 10 at badminton on 4 occasions, and for 17 years was chef de keep and performance manager for British eventing, leading Team GB to a massive 4 successive Olympic medals, as well as 5 European team titles. His role with British eventing earned him an MBE and an honorary award for outstanding services to equestrianism. Luckily, he's still based in Britain and is now working also with the Swedish Equestrian Federation, as well as a whole host of racing trainers, and is a great supporter and friend, as I say, of RoR. So great to have Yogi back with us. And I'm really thrilled this evening with a real jumping theme and eventing theme. I'm thrilled to say we've got Nicola Wilson with us. Nicola has been part of the British eventing senior team since 2009. She's represented Team GB on 5 different horses, including at the Olympic Games, World and European Championships, and has won team medals at them all, including Team Silver at the London Olympics of 2012. Last year, Nicola won individual and team gold at the European Championships at Avanches in Switzerland, and 4 years previously won team gold and individual bronze at the Stragem European Championships. She's got a great horse at the moment. She's got a number of very good horses, but one which many of you will be following really in awe this season is JL Dublin. We'll check in and see how he's a little bit later on. He might not be a former racehorse, but I think a lot of our viewers will be interested. So we'll check in with Nicola on him a little bit later on. But good to have Nicola with us. And also representing the North, we've got Deidre Johnston. Deidre has an honours degree in education, is a trained teacher. So it's good to have some brains on the webinar series with us this evening. But she's also got a whole wealth of experience in the equestrian field. Of course, wife to trainer Mark Johnston. She's got a lot of experience riding trained runners, and also as an owner, because of course she's an owner for Nicola Wilson. In her leisure time, she plays ponies and has her own horses. As I say, that she also competes, does a lot of BD, BE and riding club activities, as well as riding out and working with the flat racehorses at the Johnston Yard in the Northeast. As I say, she does own for Nicola Wilson as well, and she's the proud owner of half owner, at least, of that brilliant JL Dublin. So again, as I say, we'll discuss him a little bit later on, but thrilled to have all 3 of you with us. Good evening to you all. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us.
So, of course, these webinars, they're very informal, really interactive, and of course, they're all about you at home. So please, as always, send your questions in to us. You can do so using the Q&A box. As usually happens, we tend to run over a little bit, so we'll try and get to as many questions as we can as we go through the webinar. But any we don't get round to, we'll make sure that we follow up with you by email after the webinar. So do send those questions in. We've got 8 videos in tonight's webinar. It's going to be quite a jam-packed one, all about jumping, as I say, and beginning from those foundations with pole work. So let's have a look at the first of those videos. And in this video, Yogi explains the value and the role of trotting poles and why he recommends starting with them on the way towards jumping.
Some people don't use trotting poles at all. Others use quite a lot of it. I personally like them. I think all horses should be educated in trotting over the poles. It teaches what I call eye to foot coordination. In other words, they see something and then they have to react to it. It also works on their balance, the rhythm of their trot stride, and their general agility. And we are nearly there with him now, Bryony, but both of them can come once again.
Okay, so Yogi, if we start with you, if you don't mind, how soon would you start with pole work with a horse that's come from racing? How soon in the retraining process?
I mean, basically, once they come out of training, you go through the normal things of doing an MOT on them, letting them settle in, letting some of that high-powered food that they have as a racehorse go through the system, put them on maybe a slightly quieter diet, if you like. But as soon as you start working away with them on the flat and feeling what they are like, there is no reason why you can't introduce trotting poles right from the very beginning, starting with one pole and then having building up to a series of poles. And there, when I put the second pole down, I don't put it down on one trot stride, but often put it down on two trot strides in between. Because if you have just one trot stride, some horses comes in there and tries to jump it, and then you don't get the trot stride and they get a little bit stuck in them, jumping them. But then gradually build that up, because apart from that eye to foot coordination, it also starts working on their balance and the rhythm of their stride, and it develops muscles in that they have to lift their legs higher.
And as a very basic start, what sort of poles sort of layout would you be just thinking? 3 trotting poles on a basic one stride distance? What would be the sort of classic start?
Starting with one pole and then adding a second one, but with a full trot stride in between. So I would have 3 yards between the 2 poles, and then put a third pole in between those 2 once the horse is established, trotting over those, and then gradually building up to 4, maybe even 5 poles. I very rarely go beyond that, because 4 or 5 poles is really fulfilling its purpose. And if you have too many of them, it's difficult for the horse to all the time keep that rhythm and the cadence of the stride. So 4 to 5 poles would be maximum. I would then, once I've done them in a straight line, I can start using them on a circle where I put them in a slightly fan shaped. So the distance is shorter on the inside and slightly wider on the outside. And I can use them in the corners of the school, both to ride out around them to get the horses up into the corners, but also to work on them through the corner where they trot over the poles.
And Nicola, what sort of warm-up would you be thinking of? But we have a question here that's talking about the length of the warm-up before you move on to the poles. So that little bit of flat work that you do before you go over the poles. How long generally, and what sort of exercises would you be thinking of doing before you attempt those first pole session?
I think it's important to work on your partnership between you and the horse, so that you've got your control buttons there in front of you. You can go forward, you can stop, you can turn both ways. And once the horse is settled in the environment that they're in and they're feeling confident, I think it's a nice way of focusing the horses and our minds. So probably after about sort of 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes, you can, once they've sort of worked on both reins, you can slowly start to introduce the poles, and really build from there.
And Deidre, we're going to sort of move on to this shortly, but particularly when we're getting horses maybe that are coming from the flat, which of course you're going to have a lot of experience with, many of them may not have seen poles when we're first presenting them. So that needs to be a consideration, doesn't it, when we start off with our new horse?
Yes, that's right. And I think you just put them down and you maybe walk over them. Sometimes you'll see later in the video, I often walk in front of a horse because they like to follow. That's part of their physique, that they like to follow other things. And if they're a bit worried about something, you can just walk in front of them. I do it often going to saddling boxes. If a horse is a bit worried about going into the saddling box, I walk in front of it. And the same can be with the poles. But I think you just start quietly and take it from there.
And that's actually a nice lead into the second video that we're going to see, where we're going to be discussing about nervous horses. But just before we go to that video, I'll just give you a little introduction to the horses that you're going to see throughout these upcoming videos. The horse with the breast girth is a 4-year-old filly. She ran 6 times on the flat and was placed twice as a 2-year-old before being retired from racing at 3. At the time of filming, she'd been retraining for a few months with Charlotte, who's a rider in the video. The lighter bay horse you're going to see is a 6-year-old gelding who ran 13 times. He won twice on the flat and fell on his only run over hurdles in November 2018. He finished racing in 2020, and it's Breisner who you'll see on board here. And we should once again say a huge thank you to Mark and Charlie Johnston Racing, who allowed us to film there, and to all the riders who came up and enjoyed a really good day with our panelists here. So let's have a look at video 2, where we're going to be introducing the concept of poles to more nervous horses.
To me, we're going to go right back from scratch, as if these horses had literally just come out of training and we haven't actually got to know them at all. So we're going to start with some poles on the floor, some pole work afterwards, trotting poles, and then see how we get on, hopefully build up to a little jump.
So here we have, with Charlotte's horse, the 4-year-old is very nervous going over poles on the ground. So rather than create an issue at the very beginning, I'm just going to lead her over the pole, and then she'll gain confidence hopefully from following me, and then you're generally away from there.
And it's a very clever way of actually doing it and approaching it like this, because certainly those horses that has run on the flat, they are used to being led into starting stalls.
Obviously, we're focusing very much on the horse here and giving her a nice time over the stepping over a pole, which is fantastic. But as a rider, I think it's really important to remember where you're looking and your influence on them. So we'd ideally want her to look down at the pole. There's nothing wrong with that. So be able to use her head and neck, but we must stay up in our upper body and make sure that we're giving the horse direction with where we're looking. So we mustn't be looking down at the pole, because suddenly our balance will slightly tip forward, and then the horses generally will go, oh gosh, what is it? When we're wanting them to follow our eye and be trained to our eye and our body language, to follow our eye around the corner and think, actually, this isn't so frightening, because that's where we're going. Super. And what was really interesting there, the first time she maybe made a little bit of a mistake and gave it a little bit of a rub, but the second time she was very, very aware of where her feet were.
And Deidre, actually, I'll come back to you just on that, because we actually saw exactly what you were saying, didn't we, there, with Nicola walking ahead of the horse there to encourage and give a little bit of confidence. And do you find that is something that, as Yogi mentioned in that video too, it really does work and is worth trying if you have got a horse that's just a bit wary of those poles?
Yes, definitely. We use as I was saying, saddling boxes at the races where they're always going into strange places, dark, can be quite narrow doorways and things. And it just gives them a bit of confidence. We also use it going into the wash space, sometimes with the yearlings, if they're in long reins, and sometimes they just follow you in quietly and you're making no fuss. It's all nice and quiet, and the horse hopefully gets lots of confidence. And
that's the key thing, isn't it, Deidre, that you've got to make the whole thing a pleasant experience, because if you start to get a little bit tetchy with things and you start to get after them, particularly in these early stages where it is just genuinely very new to them, you're going to create an issue that they're not going to be forgetting very quickly and potentially prolonging the issues.
Yeah, that's right. If you can just start the right way and try and prevent those situations from escalating, it can make life a lot better in the long run.
And going in reverse to the first way we went round, Nicola, you raised some really good points in there in terms of just forgetting the horse a moment, but actually focusing on yourself and not forgetting to focus on yourself with where you're looking, because obviously your head, heaviest part of your body, if you're tipping forward and looking at the poles and focusing on them, you're going to be knocking a potentially already slightly unbalanced horse at this new work off balance even further, aren't you?
Yes, and it's a really good time to focus on us as riders and what we're doing, and by doing that, you're also giving the horse time and chance to relax and work out what you're wanting to hit him or her to do. So it's a good opportunity to work really on both, while establishing confidence and explaining in a nice way what you want.
Absolutely. And in terms of the trot that you'd approach, if you've got a horse that's just backing off slightly, how would you sort of approach that from a riding point of view? Would you be coming in a little bit slower, perhaps, to give them a little bit more time to have a look, or how would you generally?
Well, if you're coming around the turn to the poles, then it's important to make sure that you look up. You're looking at the end of the arena, so you're giving the horse direction. So that his world doesn't just end at the first pole. You're saying, actually, there is light there at the end of the tunnel. This is where I would like you to go, and it gives them confidence and direction and something for them to focus on as well. So it's really important that, as we said in that second clip, that the horses can look down and really see what they're doing, but we must stay keep looking up, and then I think the speed is just to try and maintain a little bit of a rhythm. So your leg is there to support them and give them confidence. So you're sort of holding their hand like you would a child crossing the road, giving them confidence that it's fine. You're not hassling them and asking them to be perfect the first time. Often to make a mistake can be positive. That's how we all get better. So I think it's our leg, and they're trying to keep them in a nice regular rhythm and let them find their own way through there, because then they will be better and they can next time, and they can build on their confidence and technique from there.
Yeah. And Yogi, any more tips for a horse that is appearing nervous of the poles at this stage? Is there anything else that we should be aware of?
Well, naturally, if you just got a horse home and it's the first time in a strange arena, the horse might be a bit spooky generally. So it's good to get that spookiness out by getting the horse familiar to the arena, familiar to the area that they are in. Once they are used to an arena, the majority of racehorses, when they come out of the stable, they do a certain amount of walking. So they are used to actually walk to begin with, and therefore go in, and as you're walking around, letting them walk over a pole a few times. And if they, to begin with, have a little jump over it, it's not the end of the world. It's just a matter of coming around again, and we'll see another example of how you deal with that scenario where the horse might want to jump over the pole rather than just walk or trotting over it. But it's a matter of reading the horse's mental stage and see, do I need to do a bit more in trot before I can go back to walk, or is the horse ready to do it straight off in walk, etc.?
Absolutely. Well, and I think the next video that we're going to show, there's a brilliant, it's quite a simple trick, but it's a brilliant trick, Yogi, which you are going to discuss in this next video. But just before we move on to that, one of the questions that we had was differentiating between a nervous horse and a horse that's perhaps being a little bit cheeky and is being reluctant or resistant perhaps to going over the poles. How would you deal with that generally? How much pressure would you put on? Is it okay to turn around and come again and get your composure back again? And how sort of would you differentiate between those two things?
Well, any rider or any trainer of a horse, any horseman, it's about reading the horse and reading the state of mind in the horse, trying to get inside their brain. Is it spookiness? Is it nerviness that makes the horse reluctant with the pole? Or is it just that he has no idea of what is expected of him? It could be completely that he is unknowledgeable about what you're asking him to do. Or if he has been over poles before and suddenly is reluctant to it, is it because he has been frightened about it or have a bad experience of it? Or is he simply just being a little bit boisterous today and taking you on and testing the territory of who is in charge? And it's a matter of seeing if you can read what the horse is doing, and sometimes you have to go a little bit by trial and error, and there I would always start with giving the horse the benefit of the doubt that he's a bit nervous and a bit unsure, and try to settle him down, reassure him, pat him, and like Nicola showed there and Deidre has talked about, walking in front of him, maybe even leading him over, holding on to the rein, patting him from the ground, patting him from the top, and then see how you get on. If it is that he is a little bit boisterous, then you might have to put him into action and ride him more forward. Maybe even give him a cant around the outside of the school first before you go back to the walk and to the trot. You get that little bit of energy out of him, etc. But I go back to what I said earlier. It is about trying to read the horse's brain and then act accordingly.
Absolutely. And I mentioned this little trick, and this particular video we're going to see now is about addressing a horse that jumps the poles on the ground. So many of you might have this issue in the early stages of retraining. Have a look at this and how Yogi deals with it.
So we can see here on your horse, Breisner, he likes to come in and have a little pop over them. But what I'd like you to do now is to just come from where you are and trot up through this gap here. And this is a sort of good way if you have a horse that jumps every time they go over something. This here can help you to get the horse to understand how to trot over the jump. Good, and then you can make a little turn there and then trot back up over it. That's good. And then a turn and come back again. And then turn and come back up again. This is when he stays trotting over them. Where should you look? That's it. There you are. So it's just a small little thing that one can use as a trick if you are set on that you want to trot them up over the poles.
I thought, Yogi, that was actually quite brilliant. I know it's quite simple, but it seemed to really work there, didn't it? And it is just so simple, and it's not something necessarily that you would think of. So it's a great thing to have in all of our toolboxes when we're dealing with former racehorses. Just tell us a little bit more about perhaps what is the reason why that helps so much and clearly so quickly with a horse that's sort of reacting.
It's always nice when it works, and I can assure you it doesn't always work, because there are many a time you try something and it doesn't work. And that's of course where you have to realize, is it wrong what I do, and you have to change it, or will it work by you persevering? And again, that is that judgment that you have to make. But all training of horses is about to get them to understand what it is you want them to do. And that's why you often need to go right back to the very simplest of exercises. If it doesn't work in trot, you might have to try it in walk. If it doesn't work in canter, you try it in trot. And in this situation here, by opening the poles up, there was no reason for them to jump, but they could still, because horses has got peripheral vision, see those poles on the side. And once I knew that he trotted through the gap, I made the gap narrower and narrower until the poles were there, and that was a way of getting that horse to understand that he could actually trot over a pole lying on the floor rather than actually having to jump it. It's, having said that, it's not a bad thing when a horse comes in and there is a pole that they play with their feet and then pops up over it, because it's a real nice instinct to see that they look at what's in front of them and they are prepared to adjust and they are prepared to avoid it by coming up in the air. So I wouldn't be just set on every horse having to trot over poles, but as I said earlier, I think it's a good exercise, and it develops a lot of areas in the horse that will help you in the future, not just from a jumping point of view, but also from the dressage point of view, with the balance and the rhythm of the stride and the cadence of the stride.
And Nicola, that's right, isn't it, in terms of not wanting to obsess if they do go in, as Yogi said, and they maybe do just hop over once or twice, that little adjustment with their feet, that is something which much further down the retraining journey is something that's going to help riders when we go off cross country or show jumping, because, you know, you do want the horse, don't you? And the better cross country horses, better show jumping horses can, to sort of adjust themselves just in front of the fence. And so it's quite a good training exercise for that reason too.
Absolutely, you're wanting the horses to think for themselves and you know, and have that fifth leg, which is really important for cross country. You know, their brains need to be very much working for themselves, but also working with us as riders. And I think you know, that starts right at the very beginning, and working over poles and adjustability, and also the horses being aware of their footwork is crucially important.
And Deidre, again, if we had one that was still being quite sort of reactive to these poles, we could return to that thing we discussed at the beginning, where we're, you know, encouraging somebody on the ground perhaps to walk with them and just show them that it is not an unpleasant experience, and that it's, you know, you are just going to be stepping over the pole and walking on and eventually trotting or walking through the poles. So again, it's having that person on the ground for the very nervous horses might be worthwhile for this too.
Yes, and as Yogi says, if just following you doesn't work, you can always just pop a hand on the rein and guide them through, and hopefully then you just make them realise it's no big deal and nothing to be frightened of.
And in your experience, in terms of certainly horses from the flat who may well just be a little bit sharper in those early stages, What do you generally find when you're introducing those former flat horses? I mean, many people watching this will have former flat horses. Is there a difference that you've sort of found or seen when you're starting to introduce them to poles?
It's amazing how some will think they're the scariest thing they've ever seen in their life, and others won't even bat an eyelid. Horses, like people, are very different, and you just have to go with the individual that you're working with.
And in many ways, I mean, we'll come to it later on, but actually controversially, and I think lots of other people think sometimes having a horse from the flat, actually teaching them to jump is often actually a much more pleasant experience because you can teach them. Whereas if you've got a hurdler that's raced for, 8 years over hurdles or whatever, you're stuck in a sort of undesirable, I suppose, for show jumping and cross country technique.
Yes, that's right. They've been used to jumping at speed, and whereas the flat horses won't have experienced it at all. So you're starting with a nice blank canvas, which certainly can be a bit easier, I think.
Well, looking to that first piece of jumping work, we're going to watch another video now, the fourth video that we're going to see. And in this one, Yogi is going to explain what sort of jump he starts off with when working with former racehorses.
Now, a lot of people like cross poles, and I actually do like cross poles as well. But when you start out, particularly with a horse coming from racing, I prefer a straight pole. Or like I'm going to do here, so we'll only put one side up. Just put that side up, please, Nicola, and then that can stay down. Or just putting it like this. Because if you have a cross pole, particularly if the sides are too much up, to me it shuts them in too much. And it becomes a little bit worrying from them in that sort of way. They are used to more open, wide areas. And even if they've never jumped before, just to do this to begin with, to me, it's an easier way. Some people would say it doesn't encourage them to go in the middle. They can go over this side here, and I would agree with that. But that very beginning, I wouldn't mind as long as I get between the jump stands where they go. And by having one side down, they kind of see an opening. They see that it's not that bad.
And Yogi, as a rider, as you're coming over the poles, obviously then this is the first time that they have jumped in this session. Would you then just be keeping a little bit of a supportive leg and saying, go on, that's where we're going? Or the temptation would be to sort of clamp the leg on and put a little bit too much pressure on them, perhaps?
Very good point. To me, there is always a balance. And if one is too hard on them, when they are looking and wanting to adjust their feet, you kind of panic them. You nearly need to give them time to see what's there, time to figure it out, but just like Nicola says, support them so that they realize that they have to go, but it doesn't need to be fast. Now often, the canter you get when you land is usually a good one. Then it gets worse as you go along. If they are on the correct canter lead, I think it's a wonderful way of just keeping going. So trot up over the first one, keep the trot, and then just gently in over the pole and over the jump. That's what I like. And one can even hear that nice drum beat off the floor. If we were at home and these horses had just come out of training and we were starting to play about with them like this is probably all I would do the first time.
So Yogi, starting with you on this one, I think a lot of people will be perhaps surprised because they would think perhaps that a small cross pole might be the way to sort of start. Really interesting to see that, and also interesting to see that you finish quite quickly, as you say. I suppose it's about sort of finding that outcome that you want of that session, even if it's relatively simple, and realizing you've made a step forward and, not keeping going until a bad experience happens or things go a bit wrong. So generally, would you advise that to be the way to start with most former racehorses? You would go for the sort of straight across or one side down?
Over the years, that's what I have found. They find it easiest to understand. As I said, it just gives them a little bit of an opening. And some horses will go to the side, and actually sometimes if they have stopped, they can go to the side and actually walk over the lower end, which means that the stop gets eradicated. As I said in the video, some people might criticize it for you are not teaching the horse to stay in the middle, but they will develop that as they go along. And I have found over the years, even with non-race horses, when I start them out, I often do just one side up like that for the reasons that I've just explained. But I think it's also, Deidre mentioned it before, And Nicola has also hinted on it, this thing about confidence and getting horses to enjoy what they're doing. And that's why I think, to begin with, to give them a good experience, even if it is just 1 or 2 jumps, and then pat them on the neck and put them away, and then you can continue the next day or 2 days later with a bit of jumping again, so that they associate those early sessions of jumping with a pleasant experience, that it becomes enjoyable, and that they are not going to be drilled and drilled and drilled till they get tired or drilled into making a mistake, but actually did something well, pat on the neck, and then we can come back to it a day or 2 later.
And Nicola, you raised a really great point in the video too about the riding, and actually the rider that we saw there with Azteca rode really well, didn't she, in that, particularly that first approach, because the horse what was clearly wanting to sort of look at the poles and read the question that was being asked, and she sat very well, didn't she, because she almost realized and used her feel and sort of slightly backed off so the horse could have the time to find her way through the poles and the fence. That's quite important, isn't it, in terms of the rider position, reading and having that feel and knowing when to slightly back off them and when to encourage them forward.
Absolutely. As we said before, your leg, is there for confidence, to give them that support that they need. Sometimes your leg can be there just to support them, other times to say go forward, and another time to slow down. So it's feeling and recognizing what's going on underneath you and how the horse is. And exactly as you've just said, her horse really went over the poles really nicely, and yet she also gave her horse time to read the question, to work it out, and that little bit of nice support from her leg, and the horse and the mare really answered the question beautifully. And that's a nice time just to say, even with your voice, good girl, you've done a really good job there, and just so that they're aware that it felt good to them, but also you've either given them a little pat on the neck or even with the voice.
And Yogi talked about the canter away from the jump generally improving and then gradually getting worse. Would you typically go away from the jump and plan a transition, maybe 8 or 9 strides later back to trot? How would you normally sort of see the going away from the jump? Nicola.
Oh, sorry.
So we were just talking, Yogi was mentioning about the canter going away from the fence,
yes,
and how that canter is usually better. Would you make a conscious decision to have a trot transition, perhaps sort of 8 or 9 strides or whatever, sort of after the fence, and actually make it a conscious decision not to just keep cantering all the way around the arena?
I think, you could use feel and how the horse is feeling off your leg and how their balance is. You could do a variety of things. You could do a circle and then come back to trot, or, as you say, a few strides and then back to trot. Sometimes they may well land on the incorrect canter lead, and it's a nice opportunity to correct that canter, bring them back to trot, ride them forward into the correct canter lead, and just play around. Use your feel and how the horses are feeling, to sort of do a little bit of your dressage as well. When you're jumping, you're not just jumping, you can still work them through a little bit of a system as well of training them as if you were wanting to work on the dressage test as well. So it's linking everything in that's going to improve suppleness, balance, coordination, rideability, and also the feel and the partnership between horse and rider, which at the end of the day is really, really important.
And Deidre, if we've got a horse that perhaps is a little bit sharp or a little bit forward going into the fence, actually making those downward transitions afterwards and making it a conscious downward transition is quite a good schooling exercise anyway, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And you might even bring it back to walk. You might do a trot transition, then a walk transition, then back to trot again, and making them think about what they're doing and listening to you, and then the jump hopefully will be much easier.
And generally, what would you do? We'll start with Deidre and then we'll go back to Yogi. If there is an issue that crops up, such as a refusal, for example, and perhaps obviously with the fence being as Yogi describes, actually it's quite easy to get them just to walk over the small end, which will emit that sort of refusal. But if for example, there's a blatant refusal and the horse darts off to the side, what sort of things would you be looking at to build confidence again? Generally, would you come round again and just try and gain the composure and just reapproach, or what would you be sort of thinking at that point if an issue is becoming sort of bigger? Deirdre.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was to you. I thought Yogi was going to do that.
No, I said we'll get Yogi's thoughts in a second, but just before I do, what would your sort of thoughts be if a refusal crops up and there's an issue beginning to crop up?
Yeah, that's a hard one.
We'll hand that to Yogi then in a minute.
Yeah, I think he'd be the man for that. Him or Nicola would be better than me.
Yogi, just on that then, I mean, obviously you said about the fence being lower on one side, and that really does create a channel to go through, as you and Nicola have been talking about. What would you do if you've got a horse that's having this big sort of refusal and it's becoming a bit of a drama?
Well, again, if you are instructing and you're watching from the floor, you would observe what's happening. If it was something that was just happening, the horse might have spooked or the rider might have lost their balance and so on, then there's no reason why you can't come again over the same jump. But if it is because the horse is a little bit worried or don't understand what you're doing, I would lower the fence straight away, make it easier. Maybe if it was put the poles back on the floor, come around again until I get the horse's confidence going. It often is, if you've taken one step too much forward, you have to take 2 or 3 steps back in order to rebuild again. It's no point to just knocking your head against the wall and think we have to persevere through that. Naturally, again, we come back to what you mentioned earlier. If the horse is a little bit boisterous and he is being naughty about his stopping, then you might have to insist, and there might be times when you have to use poles on the side of the fence as wings to just frame him in so he don't get the opportunity to run out to the side, etc., if he runs out rather than that he is stopping. But again, I think it's worth mentioning here in this situation that Nicola very rightly said about holding the horse's hand and being there supporting him with the leg. And I often think that it's important that the rider has a hand to hold as well. And I would strongly recommend that everyone carries a neck strap when they are doing this. And I know this will bring a smile to Deidre's face when they are going to jump these horses, because when they are in the beginning and they are green, they can get a bit jerky. They might spook. They might try to run out and then suddenly straighten themselves out. And to just have a neck strap to put a couple of fingers in underneath means that it gives you as a rider security, not just to prevent you from falling off, but also that when the horse do jump, that if you should lose your balance a little bit, you catch the horse around the neck rather than catching the horse in the mouth, which would be uncomfortable for him. And that could in itself lead to that then he's reluctant to jump the fence again in the future. So from that point of view, a neck strap is as much part of the jumping equipment as a saddle and bridle is, in my opinion.
Very, very good advice indeed. One of the issues we sometimes struggle with in these early retraining pathways, I suppose, is the adjustability of our horses, particularly in distances in the jumping. So this next video is going to look at an exercise with a pole and 2 fences. And then after, on the other side, we'll have a little discussion about adjusting your horse's stride.
I find that when you're introducing them to cantering over something, to have a small fence like this and then 3, 4 or 5 canter strides down to another fence very often helps the horse to learn what it is like meeting a fence out of canter. I would do that with young horses as well, but even though these ones might have jumped before, from coming out of training, it's not a bad exercise to introduce them to keeping more of a show jumping type canter rather than a racing type canter. My guess is that you should be able to trot to this one and get 4 or 5 nice canter strides down to the next one. First time they might spook a little bit, don't worry about it. Same as before, land, canter away. Because to me, when you practice, one should always have in mind what it is you want in the end of the day. The end of the day is to jump a course of jumps. Charlotte, it takes the 5 strides down there. Bryony's horse is a little bit more open, taking the 4 strides. I'm not too worried about that at the moment. Yes, I would eventually like Bryony's horse to be able to keep the stride shorter and come down there on the 5 as well. But at this stage, I'm not too concerned about it. Good.
Well done.
Then you can walk and pat her.
So Yogi, we saw that there was a distance 4/5 distance. Is that sort of the distance you'd be looking at typically starting with the majority of former racehorses?
I like that, even for young horses, as I said, 3, 4, 5 strides. And so they trot into a fence, then land, and then canter on down to the next one. And very much, I mean, you know your own riding ability. Some riders naturally find it very easy to canter down to a fence and to see a stride, in which case it's no problem for them to actually have single fences and canter down to them. But if you are a little bit unsure about your own ability to see a stride down to a fence, to start out with, to use the trotting pole, trot into a small fence, and then have a set distance of 3, 4, or 5 strides down to another fence actually helps you to pick up the rhythm of the canter and ride a stride pattern that is comfortable for the horse. And it means that he's going to meet that first fence that he jumps in canter on a correct striding, which will help his confidence and will teach him what it is we are going to do. And then it will be very easy to just take what I call a little help fence out and then come in canter just down to the single fence. And that can help both the rider and the horse with getting the partnership, like Nicola was saying before, getting that partnership going together, where the rider learns to adjust their eye to that particularly horse's canter stride into a fence.
And when we take away the second fence, if you like, and we're back to a single fence, would you just keep that placing pole 3 paces out from the fence, just to, again, just help the rider to see the stride?
Not necessarily. I would take the whole fence away so that they could come in canter, because if you have a rider which has got a very good eye for a stride, to have a pole set on a correct distance for them to canter into, meeting that pole right and then down to the fence will help. But of course, if the rider can't meet the pole correctly, then the distance will work out wrong to the fence as well, whilst the little fence sets the horse up for that canter stride, because as they're trotted in, they're always going to meet that correct.
And Nicola, just before we go to your video, which has the golden rules, your golden rules to riders when approaching a fence, would you be looking at staying in with a combination such as this, going in trot still, and then allowing the horse to pick up the canter to do the distance? Would you still be approaching in trot, basically?
I think it gives the horses chance to stay settled, doesn't it? You know, often if you canter into the first fence, then they sometimes can gain speed easily. So I think a little bit of a combination, you know, very much going by how the horse is feeling, you know, build in trot and then canter down to the next one, and then work them in canter as well. And sometimes you can put a pole or after the fence as well, on a couple of strides later. Then you can even make that into a raised pole, so that it's helping the horses focus as well, on helping to keep their balance and their rhythm. And then if the horses have gained in confidence over the trotting poles, it's sometimes a nice exercise then to come back to trot and pop over some trotting poles. So you're helping to really focus the horses' minds, and we're working on the balance and the transitions and keeping the confidence and the rhythm. So it's sort of it's good to play around with a variety of different things, depending on how the horses are reacting to the question that we're posing to them.
And Deidre, you know better than any of us, really. These horses are, you know, all shapes and sizes. Even, you know, Mark's yard will be full of a whole range of horses, very different personalities, characters. And it just underlines again, doesn't it, that you've got to take an individual approach when you're doing these sort of exercises to how that horse is reacting. It may naturally have a very long loping stride, or it may well be like a sewing machine. So it's sort of looking at the individual, isn't it, and reacting as well on your feet to the type of horse and the type of horse you're dealing with.
Yes, absolutely. They are so different. It's incredible. I've been riding the yearlings. Obviously, they've just turned 2-year-olds, and you sit on one and it's busy and it wants to be doing things, and another one, it's like a 10-year-old. I mean, they're just so different, and you just have to, you know, take them as you find them and ride them accordingly. They're amazing. They never cease to amaze me, these horses. They're fantastic.
The next video we're going to look at, it has got Nicola's golden rules to riders when approaching a fence. So let's have a look at that, and then we'll have another chat on the other side.
I was just saying earlier that obviously when we're riding the horses, the rhythm and the impulsion is very, very important. But not only are we feeling what's going on underneath us, it's very important that we as riders are sitting in the right place and looking in the right direction. It's only natural, and so many of us do it until we try and train it out of ourselves, to be drawn to the base of the fence with our eyes. And when our eyes are drawn to the base of the fence, our head tilts forward and our upper body slightly follows. Therefore, the balance slightly goes onto the front end and the horses go, oh gosh, what is it? Instead of staying in a good balance ourselves, therefore helping the horses stay in a good balance and a good rhythm. And the difference, just by being aware of where you're looking, is enormous. So I always, myself when riding, always think about that and make sure that I'm sitting in the right place and therefore looking after the rhythm and the balance of the horse.
And Nicola, again, we come back, don't we, to focusing, making sure while we're looking at the retraining journey of our horses and focusing on their education, constantly reminding ourselves of our position and how we're riding and not being flustered or tipping forward. And particularly with some of these horses, which to begin with, let's be honest, may not be the most careful. There might be poles flying down because we're getting some hollow jumps, or, you know, we've sort of just got to deal with that, but also just try and maintain throughout our sort of posture and position generally to help the horse ultimately.
Yes, absolutely. And as Yogi said earlier, you know, in those situations, having the neck strap is crucially important. And if we're sort of trying to go through the checklist and trying to make sure that we are doing our level best to be doing things correctly, then eventually, as the horses relax and start to work with you and gain confidence, then they are going to, you know, follow you down that track. So it's, yes, one thing leads to another, and yes, sometimes they are finding questions difficult, and you know, and patience and confidence is key to everything.
And Yogi, you've got two acronyms, apparently, PPE and PPD. So tell us a little bit about those. And I don't think PPE is anything to do with contracts for health and safety.
Absolutely. No, I mean, just before this pandemic, if someone said PPE, everyone would look and think, what is that? And now, of course, the most of the population knows what PPE stands for. And so I actually have got PPD now when it comes to horse riding. And that is the three things that the rider is responsible for. They're responsible for their own position on the horse, which naturally then leads to that the horse can keep his balance, because if the rider is unbalanced or unruly on top of the horse, it becomes difficult for the horse to keep his own balance. So the rider is responsible for his own position. Like Nicola said before, important to look up, be there to support them with your leg, etc. And then the second P stands for pace. The rider is responsible for the pace. Nicola mentioned that she wanted to check up on that the buttons are working, that she can slow the horse down and get the horse to move forward. Those are the controls to give us the pace that is suitable for that horse to go into different jumps. And here comes in what Deidre talked about with the different characters of the horse and the different stride length and the different canter in the horse. We have to be prepared to adjust the pace according to the horse so that the horse is comfortable to handle himself in that pace. It's not a set miles an hour. There's a little bit of a range, and naturally we have to start working towards the stride length that is going to be suitable for jumping the distances that is set by the course designer when it comes to jumping a course of jumps for one stride combinations, two stride combinations, etc. A racehorse range of stride is much, much longer, so we need to teach the horse to shorten up in that stride, and that comes into the pace as well. And then the final one, which again goes together with what Nicola is saying so well about looking up, and that is we are responsible for the direction, where we are going, that we are held to a straight line, that we're in the middle of the jump, that we ride a turn correctly so that the horse can then come on to the fence and to the approach to the next fence in the right way. Because as I said earlier, the aim is to be able to jump a course of jumps in the end of the day.
Well, talking about jumping jumps at the end of the day, the narrow fences are essential at all levels now. Over the last decade, certainly in eventing, everything's become narrower. And here's Yogi on how to teach horses to jump those very narrow fences.
So when you event, you have to jump skinny jumps. Yeah. So I thought we'll just show, that's a bit of fun. I would like you to just jog up through the gap here, please. You can trot. Good, then you can, all of you can once again trot or canter, whatever you prefer. We can just lift one of them away, please. And then you can come once again, please. When one is playing about with small little things like this, and particularly when they are skinny, I often say to people, the faster you go, the quicker you run out. So basically, you need to control the pace. And on many a time, it's actually slightly easier in trot because the horse has got feet in the ground all the time when he's trotting. Whilst when he's cantering, he has that moment when he's up in the air, when it is less easy for you to gain control. Good, and then stop, turn round, and jump the same fence again. And this is something that I often do with the young horses when I'm introducing them to something skinny like this, is to quietly just go forwards and backwards and stop like that. Because what you do when you stop here, you're almost saying to the horse, there it is, go and jump it. And apart from knocking it over, I actually think he's doing that really, really nicely indeed.
So Yogi, we saw there it was quite quickly built up to a narrow fence, and you discuss again the importance of potentially going in trot to those narrows. And I think that's really important, isn't it? Just to control, again, just trying to make everything a happy and positive experience. You don't really want to have the horse taking any opportunity to run out, really, if you can help it.
No, you would like to teach him the right thing right from the beginning. And that was a good example of what I would call gradual training. So we had a gap between the two fillers, then we put them together. They were nice and wide. They got to jump the filler. Then when we took one away, so it was a narrow fence, we used the poles as wings, and then we put the poles on the floor, and then gradually we took them away. And then, as I said, we went forwards and backwards so that the horse learned to actually go towards the jump, not needing speed and big areas to actually go and jump it. But there it was, right in front of them. Now we go down and pop over it in that uncomplicated way and keep into the line. I think they also demonstrated the importance of the rider's precision, the pace that they came in, and naturally to hold their direction when they're jumping their skinny jumps.
And Nicola, do you have anything to add in terms of preparing for those narrow fences? You're very experienced, of course, at facing many of those, particularly with a horse perhaps that is starting the retraining or education generally. Any more sort of tricks or tips and things when approaching these narrows?
No, I think Yogi's an expert at training these things, and he has given me many valuable tips over the time. But I thought it was really interesting there as the horses, and generally as horses get more confident, in the trot, it's giving them time to work the question out, as we've mentioned previously. But as they start to get more confidently, they hop into canter and offer to canter over there, and I think that's a really nice sign that then the horse is taking you, and at the end of the day you're wanting the horse to be confident and take you over the fence rather than you feeling that you're pushing them over the fence. We need to give them guidance and confidence, but that you need to be working together. And I think it's always important, whether I'm working young horses or the advanced horses, that when you first start to do the arrowheads, again as a little refresher course, to have some wings either side or training poles as Yogi had put out there. And I think that's important that you show them the right way from the beginning, so that they can then learn that and they have the correct blueprint.
And it's also underlining again, isn't it, Nicola, the importance of the flat fundamentals, because you need the straightness there, particularly when the fences are getting narrower. The rhythm, the contact and the straightness has all got to be a lot sort of sharper.
Absolutely, it's linking in the flat work, as you say, the dressage, to all three phases: the cross country, the show jumping, and the dressage. Sorry, the importance of the transition straightness is exactly as you have just said, and adjustability and rideability, and all of these exercises are perfect for that. And I loved how Yogi, and I've never done that or seen that before until this session. You know, trotting between the two fillers and then putting them together and then taking one away. I think that's a lovely addition that I'll definitely be putting into my toolbox.
Brilliant. The final video is building everything that we've discussed in this webinar and putting it all together, because this time it's looking at jumping around offences. So a few more tips from Yogi in this 8th video.
Jumping a course of jumps is all about linking jumps together with the correct line in between. As I said in the earlier lesson, the next fence starts when you land from the previous fence. To me, yes, keeping your position through the round, riding the correct line, and then being prepared to adjust the pace so that you are in the correct pace throughout the round is what's going to help you jump the fences. If you get those things right, very often the jumps take care of themselves.
So before we move on to the questions, Yogi, I'll just come back to you in terms of just general hints and tips in terms of putting the fences all together. How many fences would you perhaps generally, and again, I realise we have to caveat everything with we're dealing, you know, with the very individual horse, but what sort of course would you be looking at? Would you be looking at sort of 6, 7 fences with a very simple double, or what would your general course description be?
Well, I think the video clips here have demonstrated what I can call progressive or gradual training. So you'll have 2 fences on a related distance we worked on earlier. Then you'll have introduced a 1-stride combination by trotting in that you can then take on to canter. And then you can start linking up maybe 2, 3, 4 fences at a time, introducing a dog leg as you saw there. And then eventually, once the horse, you feel confident in that, you would put the whole course together where you would jump up to maybe 6, 7, 8 fences, which is, you know, was normally for what a novice horse will get when he comes to a competition. And there again, for people that maybe have to do a lot of work to themselves, if they are planning to go to competition, it's not a bad idea to look up the rule book, see what it says for that level of competition that you're going to go to. Will I get a 1-stride, 2-stride combination? What related distances is it allowed to be on that level? How many fences are there going to be, etc.? What time do I have to ride at without getting time penalties and so on? Because that you can then put into your training so that you prepare yourself and your horse for that very first competition.
And Nicola, that's really important, isn't it, actually? And some of those, as we progress into competition, certainly knowing the sort of speed that, you know, you are cantering at, I mean, it's actually very important for cross country too, isn't it? And just being generally aware of your horse and the speed and the distances that you should be facing or are going to face.
Yeah, absolutely. That's crucial. But I think also in your training for the competition, you know, you don't have to, okay, this is fence 1 and this is the last fence. You don't have to go in that order. You know, if you feel that a training circle or to break up a distance is important or you know, to repeat that, don't be afraid in your training to do that. Obviously, you know, that's all part of developing the rhythm that you then want for the actual competition when you get there. But and then building on that step by step, and then once you're feeling that you've got a nice rhythm, is that rhythm of the correct tempo so that you aren't going to get time faults in the competition. So I think it's step by step, but first of all making sure that you have confidently ticked the first box before moving on to the next one. And don't put too much pressure on yourself that it has to be perfect the first time, because, you know, quite often it isn't, and that's all part of learning. And you know, just take it step by step so that then you can achieve your goal of linking all of the fences together and having that clear round and inside the time in the show jumping or the cross country.
And that's right, isn't it, Nicola? And they don't, people, especially if they're starting off at, say, a B90, for example, if that's where they're heading, or they don't need to become obsessed, even though it's good to be aware, obviously, of the rhythm and knowing the sort of roughly the speed that you should be traveling at. But actually, equally, you don't want to become obsessed because you want to, so that sort of level, you just want to be in a nice rhythm, a comfortable rhythm. It's quite even. You don't want to be thinking about rushing the horse off its feet or panicking too much and over obsessing about time.
No, you need to, take every situation on face value, and if you do need to take a backward step, there's nothing wrong with that, to overcome something and then move forward again, and have sort of bite-sized, achievable goals. Yes, it's always nice to have a time scale on that, but being realistic that you sometimes have to tweak or amend your plans going forward.
Absolutely. We'll move on to the viewers' questions, because there's quite a few of them. This question I'm going to probably drop in with all three of you. It was sent in by Rebecca Luff. She has an ex-flat 4-year-old, and she's had the horse just since October, so not all that long. He had raced up until the end of September, so was hard and fit on arrival. His jumping is showing promise. How much should we be doing, bearing in mind his age, 4, and fitness level? Deidre, I'm going to start with you on this one, because I think you'll be good to give an insight into sort of where your typical 4-year-old flat horse is generally when they're leaving racing, and considerations that we maybe need to be aware of if we've got them and they've only raced maybe 2 or 3 months ago.
Well, it'd be nice to, for them to have them let down a little bit. So as Yogi said earlier, decrease the rocket fuel, put them on something a bit more appropriate for what you want to do, a bit of turnout, all those things will really help, that the horse is nice and relaxed. But these horses have done everything. We're riding them at 18 months old. These ones we have now, they're going through the starting stalls, into the wash bays, into the horse box, through, they're doing everything. They are so well educated. So really, I think at the moment you just pick up and you start, they've been in training all these, presumably if it's, being raced at 2, 3, and then into 4. 4 for us is quite an old horse. So they're quite capable of doing plenty. But it means, as we talked about a lot, about the feel, when you're doing flat work with your horse or you're into the jumping, you feel when it gets a bit tired. Don't let it get tired. I think that's one of the big things, that do lots of your exercises, and when the horse is feeling well, and when it gets a bit tired, that's when you stop, you back off and you take it another day.
And the good thing, Deirdre, if they get them from a trainer such as Mark, yourself, or any of the, we've got a lot of great trainers who are now focused so much more on the retraining, the rehoming of the horse. Actually, if you're lucky enough to get one directly from, or you find out, many of them won't mind you probably giving them a quick call, will they, or a quick email, just to sort of check where that horse was up to, if there's any sort of little quirks that you might need to be aware of that could potentially then help with the retraining.
Yeah, no problem. We get contacts all the time, either email or phone calls, and we will always do our best to give them all the information that they need, because that's the best for the person who's got the horse and the horse that we've looked after and cared for a long time.
Absolutely. Yogi, to you again with that question too, just fairly briefly, and I'll come to Nicola as well. So this horse showing a bit of promise in the early jumps, which, as we've already said, actually a lot of flat horses can be great over the jumps. How much should they be doing, bearing in mind 4 years old? But as Deirdre said, actually 4 for a flat horse is fairly old.
Well, the real advantage here of getting a horse out of training rather than maybe buying one that is bred as a sport horse is that here you have a horse that is already fit. His body is tuned to take work, whilst a sport bred horse is very much in the beginning of his education and of his work as a 4-year-old, and you actually need to spend time getting his body accustomed to work, whilst the thoroughbred horse out of training is already accustomed to that. So I actually think it's very, very solid advice that don't get them tired, and because they might use different muscles when they start doing the dressage and jumping to what they've been used to when they're galloping, they might get muscle fatigue to begin with. So you have to be prepared to back off them from that point of view. But other than that, to kick on and work away with them. After all, this horse is going to be 5 next spring. Hopefully he can start doing some eventing, some show jumping, some dressage competitions in the spring. And from a jumping point of view, there is no reason why he can't jump a couple of times a week. Again, if you feel that he gets a little bit tired from it, I might give him 2-3 weeks without any jumping and then go back into it again. But like you would do with a normal sport horse, and then aim to actually have him up and running and do some competitions with him in the spring. And then possibly, like you would do with most 5-year-olds, come May, beginning of June, when the grass is at its best, give them 3-4 weeks break then, to then build them up to have an autumn season with them again.
And Nicola, just briefly, it's actually not just about thoroughbreds. Let's just talk about, your team of horses too. Generally, how do you approach how many times to be jumping each week?
Again, on an individual basis, really, depending on, often the young horses will want to do little short and often jumping sessions, so that they can continue to develop and get stronger and learn their technique and get more confidence. The older horses that are very established would perhaps not jump as often, maybe once every 10 days, and then you would maybe in between pop in some little sort of cavaletti work or strength and conditioning work over trotting poles, walking and canter poles, and raised trotting and canter poles. So it's almost a little bit like their gym session, but very much done on an individual basis. As Yogi and Deidre had both said, the horses don't want to get tired. So obviously the young horses, if they're doing pole work and strength and conditioning work, as I said earlier, like taking them to the gym, they only want sort of little bite sizes of that, whereas the older horses, your more advanced event horses that are more structured and conditioned to that work, you can work them a little bit harder and more frequent. And a good gym instructor would always do a piece of work and then give them the recovery period, and then work those muscles again, and then give them the recovery period. And that is very much what we need to be mindful of when we're working the horses, and being aware of what level they are at and their level of fitness.
And slightly now on the other end of the spectrum, we've got a couple of questions that have come in, one of them from Harriet Price and another one from Anonymous, discussing horses, as I say, at the other end of the scale, 9-year-old, 12-year-old. These horses been out of training, though, for a long time, varying from 1 year to actually being out of training for three years. How would you approach that? I suppose, of course, it depends on what they've actually done in the interim, doesn't it, to what their level of fitness is, and whether there was an injury perhaps that meant that sort of delay in training. But Yogi, generally with an older horse that's maybe had a longer break, what sort of differences would you be considering there?
First of all, you have to establish which level of education they are in, because you could get a horse that has raced on the flat till he was 6 or 7 years of age. It's rare, but it does happen. And then he might have been retrained and done very, very little for a couple of years. So his jumping education is maybe still only for a 5 or 6 year old, even though he might be a 9 or 10 year old. So you need to take that into consideration. But then, very much like what Nicola said, if he is establishing jumping and he knows what he's doing, then they need less of it than the younger horse that is still learning. And the younger horse, naturally, you have to show them all the different types of fences and combinations, and on the cross-country side, going in through water and over ditches and up and banks and so on and so forth. The older horse, if he knows all of these things already, he only really needs a reminder. But that's where you can take, what Nicola has been saying, is that you can still work the jumping muscles by going over cavalettis and raised poles and so on. You don't need to jump big fences in order to keep those jumping muscles going.
And Nicola, I'm actually going to throw this one to you first, if you don't mind. It's from Harriet, and she asks about introducing your horse to fillers for the first time. Any tips on that?
With the fillers, you get all shapes and sizes and colours, don't you? And they can be really quite scary. I think it's really nice to maybe introduce them just to the side of the fence to begin with, where one wing might well be. You could have them at both sides on the wing, each side of the wings. And then slowly, as the horse starts to progress and pop over the fences confidently, you can edge those in bit by bit. And I think that's a lovely way of introducing fillers to the younger horses that aren't used to them. And there's no hidden surprises. They're used to them on the outside, and then they slowly start to come closer and closer to the middle. And I think that's a nice way of working with them.
Yogi, back to you, and again, I'll get Nicola's thoughts on this too. This is a really good question from Simon and Liz Harrison. Firstly, she says, thank you for another great webinar. So that's obviously to you panelists, you've been brilliant. Could you touch on slowing down and shortening the stride of an established chaser into his fences, as opposed to starting a flat horse? You mentioned the issue earlier, but I've not expanded on it. So perhaps they're now looking, if it's an ex-chaser, it may well be one that's taking gigantic strides and perhaps throwing himself at the fences. How do you approach shortening a stride, a stride on a monstrous, huge ex-national hunt horse, Yogi?
So in show jumping, we are working on a 12-foot stride, so for 4 yards, which in meters is 3.6 meters basically, and that's what the course designer is building when he's putting the combinations and so on in. In racing, horses, when they're really galloping, are actually going up to twice that length of stride. So it's actually quite a lot of shortening that horse needs to learn to do. The exercise we showed earlier with a little fence and then 3 counter strides down to another fence can help, because you can then gradually start with a distance which is comfortable for the horse, and then gradually you start shortening it up, and he learns to shorten his canter stride up. And working with canter poles on the floor will also help to get him to shorten his stride up, and naturally the flat work. And that's where transitions comes in, because once the horse has understood the canter strike off, and again, if we go right back to basics, in racing, when the horse comes on to the bottom of the gallop, basically the jockey sits down, shortens his reins up, goes out of the saddle, and the horse has got used to popping himself into canter. When it comes to us riding them and striking off the canter, we have to do a strike off, and the horse has to learn to accept that aid. But once he's done that, often when he goes into canter, that first stride is short, the same as after a fence, the stride is a little bit shorter. So you go from trot into canter, and the longer you canter, often the longer the stride gets. So you canter maybe for just half a circle, 3/4 of a circle, back to trot, change the rein, back into canter, until the horse learns to hold his shortened canter stride for longer and longer as he comes in. And that's where the natural balance comes in again, and how the horse is starting to accept the contact and the control. And that's where it's very important to listen to what Deidre has been saying about the horses getting tired, because when you start doing more intense work like that to shorten the stride up, then they will get tired much, much quicker. And once they're tired, they're not going to be able to keep the canter together, and then you're working against that. So it's very important there to do little and often.
Yeah, and Nicola, we're essentially, aren't we, with some of these ex-hurdlers in particular, but we're essentially trying to get these horses to change the way they're jumping a fence, aren't we? We're asking them, rather than flattening across the fence, we're asking them to bascule and round over the fence. So it's quite a demand, isn't it, on their physical, on their body, and the sort of musculature has got to change, hasn't it? So what Yogi said there about the flat work coming into play here as well is going to be really important to build your horse up, isn't it, in order to hopefully eventually get that improved shape.
Yeah, absolutely. And also we've touched on earlier about, the rider's position as well. Leaning forward does mean go faster and can mean go longer. So I think, being aware that your upper body, trying to sit up and grow that little bit taller and more upright in your upper body can also have a little bit of a half halting effect as well. So you're trying to influence their balance as well. And you're trying to encourage them to bring the weight back onto their hind legs a little bit more, and therefore they are able to take a shorter distance, a shorter stride, and also coming into a fence, trying not to come round the turn with with a lot of weight and contact down both reins, work them down the outside rein and try and, give and retake a little bit of the inside rein and also keeping your upper body up and supporting the horses with the lower legs, so that you're encouraging the back end to come through a little bit more, therefore able to carry their front end. So, and all of these things sadly don't happen overnight. It's patience and repetition, and hopefully we'll get there.
And Yogi, particularly you obviously work a lot with hurdlers and with trainers with the hurdlers, and as we say, we're trying to change the shape, aren't we, and the way these horses jump the fences. Actually, going back, jumping in trot, as we were discussing earlier, is surely going to help, because if you go cantering into the fence with an ex-hurdler or an ex-chaser, you're more likely to get the flattening, aren't you, across the fence?
Yes, and this is where introducing them to what we would refer to as grid work or gymnastic jumping will help them to recreate that shape, to slow themselves down and to work through their bodies sort of more like a show jumper should be doing rather than a hurdler should be doing. And also don't forget that all the chasing and hurdling is done in a straight line. And when a horse goes on a circle, their horse has to naturally shorten its stride up. So once the horse has gone through these earlier stages of their jumping, which we were showing there, to actually have a fence on a circle, 20-meter circle, and jump it on a circle will help to get that shortness of the stride. And the shorter the stride gets and the more the horse learns to jump off his hind leg, the lighter, as Nicola said, he will become through his front end, and that will then help to create more of a show jumping shape in him. But the bottom line is that if the horse is naturally careful, it doesn't really matter what shape he makes over the fence, because the only thing that matters is that the fences stay up. So if he is naturally careful, even if he jumps a bit like a hurdler, I wouldn't meddle too much with his shape, because then you might just confuse him. You must work to what he is comfortable with, and that he learns to act and operate in a way that he's going to be able to cope with what is being asked of him from the cross country and the show jumping point of view if you go eventing, and from the show jumping point of view if you go show jumping, and not over focus on his actual style over the fence.
And that's a fair point, isn't it? Because we've got 5-star event horses, haven't we? Which you could argue don't make the correct, necessarily 100% correct shape in the show jumping, but actually they get the job done. And with all things considered, they're still a very good horse.
Absolutely. And I mean, Nicola's wonderful opposition Bass would be a fantastic example of a horse that had very, very, very much his own style of doing it. And if you saw him jumping like that as a 4-year-old, you would probably turn around and say, gosh, we need to work on his technique here. But Nicola instead worked on his confidence and the partnership that they had and how he handled himself. And he became the best in the world with his style.
And Nicola, he was an absolute legend, wasn't he? I mean, actually, let's just give him a quick mention, because what an absolute star opposition Buzz was. And actually, just tell us a little bit about his jumping style and how you sort of approached that when you first started off with him. What were your thoughts when you first started and you were airbound?
Airbound, yes, definitely. He was a fabulous horse, so brave. He found jumping like oxers really difficult, because he sort of took off on all fours. He would get closer to a fence, drop the bridle, and then just take off a little bit like a helicopter. And of course, for an upright, that was fine, but it wasn't so fine for an oxer. And in the early days, we found it very difficult to find a method or way of harnessing his enormous power and love of the job. In time, that the answer for him was actually speed. The quicker he went, he was able then to stay a little bit more down the rein, and he managed to make the oxers. So we really had to work together. He wasn't a horse that you could change the way that he jumped, but you had to try and work with his ability and his jumping technique to answer the question. And he had such a massive heart, and he was so brave and so bold. In the end, he came to us because he was a little bit slow cross country, and in the end he was far from that. And I always felt as if I had to be a little bit of his handbrake, because he always thought he was invincible, and it was my job to sort of make sure that he didn't go too quick, and he wasn't too brave, and try and make sure that he was in a good canter. But in the early days, he was very difficult. He was always jarring my back, because he would land back feet first, and then his front feet would catch up. But he had an enormous, powerful back end, and Rosemary Search, who bred him and owned him all the way through his career, said he was a little bit like a jump jet harrier taking off, really. And he was a very exciting horse to ride, and a great privilege to have a magical partnership with him.
Well, he was a total legend and always will be, but you've got a very good horse at the moment with a very nice jumping technique. And I know some of you follow eventing. JL Dublin, how is he, and what's the plans going forward for this season?
Well, Deidre Johnston and Jamie and Joe Lambert bought him as a 4-year-old. So we've had a lovely, a lot of years building our partnership and training from a young horse. And he's always been a fun horse to work with, and he's always shown a great deal of promise. In his early days, he was a little bit like a bull in a china shop, I always say, and he sort of thought he knew best, and he always enjoyed his jumping, and all the way through he sort of let off a few squeals of excitement when it was jumping time. And he's a thrill to ride and a thrill to train, and obviously 21 to go to the Europeans and do as well as he did was fantastic for us all concerned with and being part of Dublin's journey. This year it would be amazing to think that he could maybe step up to do his first 5-star at badminton, and that's certainly something that we're working and dreaming of, we'll see what happens. Take it step by step. He's had a lovely holiday after the Europeans, and he's been in work now for a long time, and just over the Christmas period had his first few jumps, which he found very exciting. So it was lovely to be back in the school with him and starting to do some conditioning work and jumping, and it's very exciting.
And Deidre, just briefly, you must be amazed that you've had an incredible 2021, didn't you, with this horse? This horse has given you so much fun. It must be a real privilege to own a horse like this.
I am still pinching myself now. Absolutely amazing. And as Nicola said, it's not a quick thing. We've had him 6 years already, and but she's brought him on just always with the long-term picture in mind, to peak last year. And it was so exciting. The whole year was it was magical. It really was.
Well, we wish you lots of success, you and Nicola, and of course Dublin, a whole load of success in 2022. But actually, Deidre, while we've got you, we're just going to have 5 more minutes, but I'd like to, because we don't often have trainers on these webinars, so I think it's a really good time to make use of that and actually just get your take on the whole retraining program, really, and how important it is. Obviously, you've got a very busy operation up there on the flat, and how important is it for you as trainers to see your horses, who often, whether they've done very well for you or otherwise, to move on and find these great homes and have a whole new career with our very viewers?
Oh, for me, it just gives me a huge sense of pride and satisfaction. And the first thing I do, we sponsor every year at the Yorkshire Show, we sponsor the racehorse class. And the first thing I do is go down the programme and see if there are any of our horses were there, because I'm desperate to go and see them. It's wonderful. And we've been great campaigners for a long, long time to try and set things up for the horses. And, Mark was always saying we should put on, classes for them in different places. That's the best way to get people to want to retrain them if there's things to do with them and take them places, because they are the most amazing horses. And they've done so much at such an early age that hopefully then, if you get the right people looking after them, they can do so much more. They're just so versatile and can do so many things.
And I think this is the key thing. I mean, we've had a couple more questions just asking sort of about familiarization, taking them to arenas, taking them on the lorry. But actually, these horses, particularly on the flat, they've done it all so early on, haven't they? And actually, that's one of the things you can say shouldn't, hopefully, with most of them, isn't so much an issue. They've seen traffic, they've had rugs flapping along their sides. it's quite a good advantage, isn't it? Whereas when you get, an Irish sports horse or whatever as 4 and 5 and it's quite gawpy and scared, it's a big advantage, isn't it? Potentially.
Yeah. Most of them have been to the sales as yearlings, so they've been handled, they've been in the horse box, they've been it amazes me watching them at the sale ring, and they go into this little box and have to stand there while the previous horse is being sold, and how good they all are, because they've been so well handled from such an early age. Yes, I do think it's a good idea sometimes if you've got your horse going to, you want to take it to do a competition for the first time, maybe go to a competition, not actually compete, because you don't know what it's going to do in that different situation. The tannoy going off might make it think of racing or things. So there's little things like that I think you can do just to help yourself and give you and the horse a nice experience right from the start. But if you're confident and you think it's going to go and compete straight away, then they've seen everything. They've been flags, Royal Ascot. I mean, you can't get much bigger crowd and noise than that, can you? And there's lots of horses that have been there. So a little show somewhere is going to be quite not too daunting for them, hopefully. But
and I just think it's really great for, as I say, our viewers just to hear it from sort of the trainer's perspective as well, because obviously I don't think it's underlined enough. Actually, there's so many trainers that and the girls as well, and the guys that work on the yard, they genuinely become attached, don't they, to a lot of these horses. They can't keep them all, and being able to follow their progress, and it's something actually that trainers nowadays anyway, they can't really avoid, can they? We've got to be looking after these horses and moving them to good homes, hopefully, and letting them enjoy the rest of their life, and doing another job.
Oh, absolutely. Well, they've got so much to offer, so many people. And we have to watch that so many of our staff do want to take on the horses, that, they've got the right situation and they can, afford to do it, and it's the right thing for the horse. I mean, they absolutely fall in love with them. I've got one saying to me yesterday, oh, mine's in Dubai, I've been watching it run. And, they follow them. Even when they leave the yard, they follow them. And it's a vocation. It's their life. We work with them 24/7. Through all spills, thrills, whatever happens, and it's the staff that work with them are a huge part of obviously the whole team. We couldn't do it without them, and it's thanks to them for the results that we get.
Well, I think it's great to hear from you as well. And just very briefly before we wrap things up, how's the joint license going up there? Is it much different or much kind of the same?
It's probably because Charlie's been doing more and more over the last 5 years. So it was just nice to get the first few winners on the board, and let's see if we can keep the momentum going, and then everybody will be happy.
They didn't hang around with the first winner, actually, did they? It came pretty quickly, didn't it? It was the 3rd of January or something. The first winner was racked up on the joint license. Yeah,
that's right. We've had 3 now in a couple of seconds. So it'd be nice to keep it going.
Well, best of luck to Mark, Charlie and yourself and the whole team up there for the coming season. Best of luck as well to Nicola, JL Dublin. Anything else to add, you three, before we say goodbye to our viewers?
Only that, thank you very much indeed for listening in to us. Hopefully you have got 1 or 2 little bits and pieces that you can make use of. And the most important thing, enjoy your riding and enjoy your horses.
Absolutely.
Well, I couldn't have said that better myself. Don't forget, you can watch this webinar and the other 2 which have already happened. You can watch those on the RoR YouTube channel. The next webinar, you can join me again on the 9th of February. That one's all about competition preparation, so much more geared about that first outing and where to start in the different disciplines. We'll cover all the main disciplines as well as a couple of niche disciplines perhaps as well, and getting out for that first outing. And don't forget, in the meantime, you can find out more information about RoR and across the website and the social media channels. Thanks so much to our 3 brilliant guests, Deidre, Yogi, Nicola. Thank you so much. And I'll see you again, everybody, on the 9th of February. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.